Absolutely.
I come from pagan descent. What do you want? You know what I mean? Anyway, I'm just joking. Let's continue.
Or do something wrong, why did you choose to do that? Do you have libertarian free will? Few Calvinists will admit that you have libertarian free will after you're born again. They'll still say compatible.
I would still just really love to hear even an attempt to explain libertarian free will from scripture, like a whole passage of scripture that describes it the way that you can pull up Romans chapter 6 and describe the actual kind of wills that the Bible describes. Like Romans 6 through 7, perfect description of the only kind of wills that ever exist in the Bible. I would love to see their version of that.
Yeah, that's one thing that we never get. Uh, Even from guys like Erasmus, when he's writing with Luther in their, you know, bondage of the will versus, you know, Erasmus's view of libertarian free will. When they're writing back and forth, Erasmus is taking everywhere in the scripture where there's commandments given and saying, see, the choice here implies ability. It implies freedom, but they never have an explicit text, whereas we have a ridiculous amount of explicit texts that show 100% that compatibilist free will and the total inability of man before regeneration is the biblical view.
Yeah, absolutely. The Bible is constantly describing what it looks like for man to be by nature a child of wrath. And you have, like you said, there's only implications drawn from things like, hey, God gave a command. Therefore, they must have the ability to obey that command. That's only an inference that they draw from the text, which their mind is not infallible, so we can't trust that. What we can trust is the actual description. See, you don't look at the fact that God gave a command and draw some kind of inference off that. You let the rest of the Bible describe the will of man, and then you take that description back to that concept that you were reading before, right? Back to the Old Testament where he says, choose this day whom you will serve, right? So then, you know, those who did choose that day whom they will serve, and they chose the Lord, you know that they chose the Lord because they were given faith by the Lord, right? He purchased them with the blood of Christ, even back then. But have we gotten to the part that you had something to say about yet?
Not yet. I do want to touch on one other thing
Go
because,
ahead.
like I said, there's no verses that they use. There are a couple that they try to use
Okay.
to say this proves libertarian free will, like 1 Corinthians 10:13. No temptation has overtaken you except it's such as is common to man. But God is faithful, who will not allow you to be tempted beyond what you are able, but with the temptation will also make the way of escape that you may be able to bear it. So they're going to say, see, that's libertarian free will because you got the temptation, and then God says you don't have to fall to it. You actually can overcome it. Now, there's two problems with their usage of that. Number one, that's written to Christians. It's not written to totally depraved people.
Right.
Um, and secondly, well, there's three. Let me name two more. Secondly, that has nothing to do with whether or not we can believe the gospel. And third, they're they're if they try to use that to say there can't be a decree and everything is libertarianly free, that's a problem because that passage is simply speaking about, from our perspective, there's no contingent thing for Christians that says you have to sin. Like we sin when we want to. Like what 1 Corinthians 10:13 is saying is if you don't want to sin, Christian, you don't have to, but you sin because you want to. But it's not saying anything about a categorical ability as to whether or not God decreed that you would sin, even though contingently you had the ability not to if you wanted to. You see what I'm saying?
I do see what you're saying, but it just gets so convoluted when you try to add those ideas of contingencies that they throw in. You know what I mean? And to me at least, we could say that we could do differently than we're doing right now. We can say that we could have done something different yesterday. We can sit here and imagine a million different things because the human imagination is only limited according to how much time we have. We can imagine anything, but it's only ever exists in our imagination. You only will ever do what you did. You're ever going to do what you're doing right now. In the future, you will only do what you will do. Anything else is just you imagining something. It'll never be fruition. You know what I mean? It'll never come to
Right.
fruition.
Right. And my point is that we are doing it because we want to.
Yeah.
And that's really important. It's an encouragement to Christians just to say, hey, when you're tempted, look to Jesus. That's all that passage is about, really.
Yeah, that's it, man. Yeah, he's going to provide the way of escape. And
Sorry, I went off on a rabbit trail.
no, it's okay. It's a short video we have to discuss here, so we might as well, say whatever we feel like saying. I'm good with that. Yeah. So we'll let him play the rest here.
Compatibilism is in play here because they recognize how the philosophical aspects will fall apart under libertarian free will, even for the Christian or for the unfallen man, Adam and Eve, before they fell. And so when you begin to...
Wait a second. We got to back him up just a little bit so we can hear him lead into that argument again. Let's let him finish it out. A whole minute.
When you choose to sin or lie or do something wrong, why did you choose to do that? Do you have libertarian free will? Few Calvinists will admit that you have libertarian free will after you're born again. They'll still say compatibilism is in play here because they recognize how the philosophical aspects will fall apart under libertarian free will, even for the Christian or for the unfallen man, Adam and Eve, before they fell. And so when you begin to press them on these issues, they begin to realize they can't use words like God is sovereign to support their view, because you can just simply say, well, is God sovereign over your choices as a Christian? Is God sovereign over the choice of Adam and Eve? Was he sovereign before the fall? Oh, okay, so that means he was sovereignly decreeing the choice of Adam and Eve to sin, and they begin to see how it falls apart. So people like Chris, who've thought through these things, say, no, all the choices are decreed sovereignly by the decree of God. And the way he handles it, again, it's an analogy of taking God outside of time and space and saying it's in a different sense that he's determining it.
Yeah, he complained there about about assuming God is outside of time and all that. And I tell you what, just provisionism gets more indistinguishable from open theism every day, doesn't it?
But I think one of the biggest issues with his entire presentation there is that he continually flattens out God's decree in order to try to make it sound like silly. He'll often say things like, yeah, God is causing problems and then he's fixing them. He's going in to fix these things, but he's only fixing what he determined in the first place. Yes, he's saving people, but that's because he determined that they would fall in the first place. And yeah, that's technically true, but you can't just flatten it out.
Yeah, well, let's go into
that's just important.
I agree that is flattening it out, but what exactly? Let's describe the opposite of that. What's a 3D model of that? You know what I mean? Let's go into that a little bit, because we hear James, Dr. White, say that all the time, that he's flattening it out. And so here's the 3D model. The 3D model of it is God is not existing in this little bubble of creation that we have here, of all of this matter and space packed into a universe, right? It cannot contain him, is what I'm saying. I'm not saying he doesn't exist in it, because he does. He chooses to. He is omnipresent, but still, not even all of the matter or space in the universe can contain Yahweh. right? Not a temple can contain him. The whole planet cannot contain him, nor the whole universe can contain Yahweh. And so he created all space and matter and time. He must be outside of that. Okay, and so that's the first point. Is what I just said a moment ago. That's why I said provisionism and open theism. No wonder they're all hanging out together, because they're, they all really do believe the same things. Because if you're going to be a provisionist and think this way about free will and God not ordaining things, you're going to have to bring God into our space. But what we have instead is a God who, as spoken of in one of my favorite verses, Psalm 139:16, and he has a book in which he established each of our days when yet there were none. It's that's a paraphrase, but and so God is ordaining reality the same way that an author ordains the reality of a book that he is writing. And he is not, I always like to use this comparison, because anyone who has done any amount of study in seminary or Bible college or any higher level of learning regarding the Bible, you're going to come across this question. You're going to come across at least like a whole chapter on this. There's a doctrine called